Well, hello. Welcome everyone to Ethically Speaking. My name is Steve Kubler, and I'm the organizer of the Ethically Speaking series. And today, if all things are working, you'll hear both remotely and those here in the audience from Dr. Rosalyn Berne, who is from the University of Virginia and has been doing some really deep and interesting thinking about animal testing and ethical frameworks associated with use of animals in engineering. I can't do justice to your topic, but that's a tease for what's coming up. Before we introduce Dr. Berne, I wanted to say a few things about the Ethically Speaking series. So Ethically Speaking is run out of the UCF Center for Ethics. It's a speaker series that we created in order for us to have a community and an opportunity to discuss contemporary moral issues writ large, really looking at ethics across all aspects of disciplines and society. And this provides an opportunity for all of our stakeholders, our students and our faculty, guest visitors, and members of the community to come together and share their thoughts and ideas about some of these really fascinating things that are happening across the ethical landscape, particularly driven by our students as they develop new research and change what our thinking can be about ethics just based on new possibilities. So these are the kinds of topics that we explore. And Ethically Speaking launched a couple of years back with some inaugural members who I'll show on the screen here. And we really appreciate their support for helping us get this speaker series started and for disseminating information about our different speakers to all of the faculty and students across UCF. So thank you very much to our speakers. Today's event, as I said, is both in person and via Zoom. So we welcome our attendees who are here remotely. You should send in chat if something goes wrong with the technology. I'll be on standby as Dr. Berne is presenting. So if something goes wrong with audio or video, please let me know. We're going to do question and answering after, and that's going to be moderated by my colleague and great friend, Dr. Jonathan Beaver. Dr. Beaver founded the Center for Ethics and is the director. And he is a good friend of Dr. Rosalyn Berne and many of the people that we bring in. I'm very grateful that Dr. Beaver is so well connected to the ethics community nationally and internationally. It gives us an opportunity to bring in some fantastic speakers. And in addition, Dr. Beaver is very aplomb at moderating Q&A. So he will manage our question and answer session. And he's going to be, he's got enough bandwidth to do this. It's remarkable. He's going to be taking questions here in person and also looking at chat. So those of you who joined us remotely, please send in your questions by chat, and Dr. Beaver will try to entertain those and make sure everyone has a chance to participate. For those of you who are here in person, after the talk, we'll have a little reception where you can meet Dr. Berne and share more of your ideas and enjoy some nibbles. And we really hope you'll stay and enjoy that. So without further ado, I'll introduce Dr. Beaver, who will introduce Dr. Berne and tell you a little bit about some of her work. Dr. Beaver.
Thanks, Dr. Kubler. It's always a pleasure. And I first have to thank you for doing all the heavy lifting, for putting together the series and getting us all organized together. And again, to the Center for Ethics and our sponsors for hosting this. I'm really very pleased to introduce Dr. Berne to you this morning. I've known Dr. Berne for quite a while now through her various leadership roles in ethics at the national, institutional, and organizational levels. She is, of course, as you might get from her bio, a powerful leader shaping policy and institutional landscapes across her career to date. But she is also, and importantly to me, one of the kindest and most supportive colleagues that one could ask for. And that's a rare combination from my perspective anyway. Dr. Berne, as you might have read from her bio, is the Shirley Olson Professor of Applied Ethics and the director of the Online Ethics Center for Engineering and Science in the Department of Engineering and Society at the School of Engineering and Applied Science at the University of Virginia. Her background stands to me as a testament of the power of interdisciplinarity. With a, if I'm got this right, Ross, with a BA and MA in Communication Studies, and a PhD in Bioethics, Religious Studies, then moving on to Engineering and Society. That sort of interdisciplinary positionality is really encouraging to me for following her footsteps. From that interdisciplinary perspective, Dr. Berne's scholarship has explored a remarkable range of topics, from nanotechnology and biotechnology to science fiction and mind-body-spirit studies. And her national leadership is just as diverse. She's developed and championed the Online Ethics Center, which is a national online repository supported by NSF, National Science Foundation, for ethics results and research. She's led the Center for Engineering Ethics and Society at the National Academies of Engineering. She's advised several foundation-led projects, served on IEEE committees, and served currently with me and others on the ethics committees for the American Society for Engineering Education. She's currently working on a book project on engineering animals that draws together several threads of her thinking and experience, along with drawing together a wide range of scholars who contribute to that project. So please join me in offering a warm welcome to Dr.
Switch your slides.
So the first question is whether the folks joining remotely could see and hear me if I'm here. Because this feels like I'm really here. Does that work?
It does, yeah. I turned the camera, you should be in good shape.
Okay. I have to be able to thank you for having me and for the introduction. Good to be here. So it would be helpful for me to know who you are, so I have a better sense of what to do with that. So it's scared when I see a couple of students. You get prize. What do you start reading? Yes. Very nice book. Okay, and biology?
Biology, yeah.
Okay. Faculty?
Biology research faculty.
Okay.
The College of Engineering faculty. Yeah,
Heard about you.
yeah. 1,500 freshmen that part of the lectures that I do involve their introduction to engineering.
Okay, okay. And is it possible that there are students viewing remotely? Do we know? Can we tell?
I can check, let them tell us in chat.
Yeah,
Students
just-
remotely.
Yeah, that would be good. Because,
We've got at least a couple of faculty and a couple of staff, and it looks like some students.
okay, same as here. Okay. Okay. So the first thing I'll do is say to you that I don't know if I work machines. Hold on. Now, you know what? It worked before.
Yeah, it did. Hang on,
Hold on.
try now.
That's better. So I'm not gonna talk about animals. It's a whole talk in and of itself. There's a lot of literature on it, a lot of work. The ground is covered really, really well. You all actually have to follow the rules about it anyway. There's already this policy, there's compliance. It's that work is done. I mean, I tend to play in fields that are not as deeply as sport and stuff. So that's what we're gonna do today. Okay. So. Well, I remember the days when we were just starting to turn the corner on what we were doing with animals, and we were starting to even print on companies that did animal testing for cosmetics, etc. They called to task. And now they print on their products with no animal testing. That's the last few decades. I remember in high school seeing the horrifying pictures of all the PR to make people feel bad about what we were doing, putting products into the eyes of rabbits and swell and infections. And so a lot has changed over the years. I think there's more and more questioning about what we ought to do. And so anyway, that's an area, as I say, there's so much out there. We're going to spend time, I think, on areas I think are less developed in terms of research. So what I will, so does it work? You might have to press the button for me.
Okay,
Is that okay?
sure.
Yeah, maybe I'm pointing it in the wrong direction.
There you go.
Yeah, it worked, it work.
No, hang on.
Okay. You seem to have the
Try now.
power. Yeah, you have the power. I am, however, inspired by an essay one of my students for ethics class. She is a biomedical engineer. As you can see from her words, she is working with animals in a lab, and she's participating in a project with her PI, and she's struggling. I have to separate this. There's a scientist in me that has to think this is for the good of humanity, and then there's a person in me that's really caring about animals. And I thought, I don't want my students to have to divide themselves. Why do we have to divide ourselves? Why can't we be whole? in our work, in our studies, professional lives. Well, it's not so easy in animals to be happy. There's a conflict, there's a value conflict for many of us. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So it's what is engineering? So nobody's an engineer, particularly, right? But so basically, we can design and develop things using structures and machines and mathematics. So let's stop for a minute, look around the room. What in this room is not engineering? You?
Yeah.
Maybe. Unless you're a child of IVF, then you are engineering. It's engineering is everywhere. It's everywhere. I could not see without the plastic in my eyes. So maybe we are not engineered, but we might be very much dependent on engineered devices or systems, not us. So with the moment you started to rain, in fact, you slept when you engineered. You got the shower, the water came to you because it was found, extracted, pumped, moved, purified through engineering. The food you eat is because of engineering. We are so engineered, it's hard, except for our biology. And even there, we're teetering on very much being a part of an engineered world, or at least unable to function without engineering. The question is, why do we engineer? And for the most part, we engineer to solve problems. And sometimes we engineer because we can. And in both cases, we have to ask often. And we don't. We just do. We just do. So I'm asking boldly, because that's an ethics question, and I'm gonna put it, and it's easier to ask questions to get the answers. In the case of how we engineer that interacts with animals, it's complicated. Is the answer. Ought we? Well, we're evolving. We're changing. Laws are changing, our attitudes are changing, our understanding is changing as we understand animals more differently. But we have deep philosophical roots that seem like a lot of us. And I'll get to a little bit about that. So anyway, we're interested in what in our obligations as human beings. What all we do, and often because we're trying to minimize harm, do the right thing as we figure out what that is. So one thing we need to talk about before moving on is this notion that engineering is neutral. And so that's an old argument that persists. So I look at that map. I look at the projector, the clock, engineered devices. And that adage is that, well, those are neutral. What's not neutral is how they're used. So like the guns don't kill people, people do. It's the same argument around engineering. This is neutral, this is just a clicker. But there's a whole school of thought saying, no, values are built into the design because human values are part of what we engineer. That device on the wall reflects the values we have of measuring time and space in very specific ways. We don't even know if time exists other than, I mean, that's actually a question. We actually don't know that time exists. Movement exists. We're pretty sure movement exists. We're pretty sure space and objects exist and they have a relation. But we made time, it appears to be, and we captured it in that device, which is values, because we want to know the movement through space. And so the values are there in the design itself, the face, the numbers, all of it's because what we want to know. Same with how that map is designed and how it's changed. Same with the phones, the cell phones that we have now are so packed with values. They're getting smaller and smaller. One day they'll be in our bodies, I'm sure of it, because of our need for them to be closer and closer and closer. All right, so that I want to say that because a lot of the way we engineer in relation to animals is value laden and value driven inside of those devices. So the other thing is so clear, so the way we engineer is ultimately about us, humans. Like, why would we do it otherwise? We want to survive, we want to thrive, we want to have a good quality of life. So anthropocentrism is the nature of engineering. We do what we do for our own sake. Even what we do where it appears to be safe for other than human animals is ultimately for us. I'll show you why. So for engineers, there's a code of ethics. This is how you should behave to be a good engineer. The computer people have a slightly different code of ethics. But ultimately, the main canon is that we have to be protective of human health. No code that I have seen in engineering ever mentions other than human animals. It's not convenient. It's not cost effective. It's not in the value system. The value system is around humans and human society. That's just the way it is. So what's the result of that? We're going to look at some of the results. Well, for one thing, we see ourselves as different than other animals. And the reason I use the word non-human animals in this talk, that's a provocative shift. That other than human animals and non-human animals is used as a shift in language purposefully to remind us that as far as we know, we're all animals. As far as we know, we have a lot in common with other animals. In fact, with certain primates, we share a huge number of genes. We're not that distinctive, but we've always believed ourselves to be, we've always engineered in a way that puts that belief forward. So our laws, for example, this is absurd. I did this on purpose. But obviously we can hunt deer, but we can't hunt each other. Obviously, we can put animals in cages and then dog at them. We can't do that with each other. We have done that. We don't do that anymore because we figured out that that's wrong. We figured out that maybe humans are all equal after all. We weren't sure about that for a long time. And so we treated other humans differently because other humans were not as good or as special or as important as us, whoever us was at the time. There's a movement to do that with animals. We're not there, but there's a movement. And part of that movement is because we're starting to question our assumptions about other humans. We're starting to learn things we didn't know before about other humans. The way we did with other people. When we finally figured out, oh, wait a minute, we're basically the same. We don't get to cage some of us just because they're different size, etc. Like we did in the circus season. Right?
Yeah, the circus is well burned together.
Yeah,
It's crazy.
Yeah. So the other thing is that, the sense of there being something beyond the physical has been part of human culture for a long time in various religions and practices, and it's not been clear or reflected in our laws and policies that other animals have anything on this. That's being questioned, but we haven't wanted to go there. We haven't wanted to go there, certainly in engineering. So, all right, where are we? All right, I think that's right here. Yeah, it's just not working.
I don't know why it's shifting.
No.
Echo?
So the next one? Yeah, I got it.
Yeah.
So, my concern is that we, for the most part, deploy our engineered systems and technologies without regard, because we're anthropocentric, because our primary concern is us. So what? So what? That's the question. I will ask you please to forward the slide and I will give up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm even having trouble.
Wow.
Bear with me. Don't know why.
I have a lot of respect for technology, but I don't want to have to depend on it in my Bible.
There we go.
It's very easy. Okay, so, most humans consider animals as food. But in order to make that happen, on a mass scale, we have to engineer systems. I'm gonna tell you a personal story. It's a diversion, but I think it's relevant. So, when I met my husband, which is the man I was married to for 30 years, we were undergraduates. I was a very accomplished champion, and he was a deer hunter. And at one point I said, "So you must be deer hunting," and he said, "I know what I'm doing when I eat meat, because I have to look into the eyes of the deer and then kill it. And I'm aware of it, and I'm conscious of it, and I've made that decision." He said, "The average American goes into the grocery store, looks at a beautiful cellophane with the plastic, and think that's a hamburger. I know that it's a cow. And this is what I'm living with, is that choice." So I went with him once. He was hunting. I was in the cabin, and I heard the gun go off. And he said, "I almost hesitated. I almost didn't pull the trigger because I looked in the eyes of that deer and I thought, oh, I can't do this. And I realized that I can never have another bite of meat again on my second." So he did. He proceeded to eat the deer for the rest of the year with nothing left to waste. I couldn't judge him for that. Couldn't judge it. He was living with his choice. Right? I have to say, I was proud of him for that. What concerns me is what we have to do in order to feed the masses. What we have to do in order to feed the masses is visualized in these systems. Do we have any choice? Well, some of us are trying. We're trying to have free range chickens in the US better. But it's not really possible in certain circumstances. And so here we have it. The question is it okay? Is it okay? Are they suffering? Well, if it's possible, and probably not. Is that okay? Is it a means to an end to feed humanity? Is it ethical? Well, we can't feed humanity meat and animals without engineered systems. Are they neutral? No. The design is there to mass house and control and feed animals so that we can eat them. That is not a neutral system. That is an anthropocentric system that's designed to feed humanity. Are there alternatives? Not that we're ready for yet. This is the way it is right now. We have to decide if we want it to be different and on what basis. How do we decide if that's ethical or not? If humans are most important, if we have to thrive first, then maybe it can be argued that it isn't. Depends on how you approach it, and that's the thing about ethics. Depends on the argument that you use. Depends on the school of philosophy you're coming from. Depends on what your values are. So a lot of times what we do with animals is we use it for entertainment. Or to make money, in this case, thoroughbred horses. So that industry starts from the breeding. So the engineering starts from the breeding. And it goes from there. They have relatively short lives because they run hard and then they're done. There was a sort of mass die-off with which race was it this year? Yeah, it was. And I just read Bet on the One. It's a mystery. They wish they did because then they could solve the problem. Is it okay what we do? It makes people a lot of money. It's been going on for centuries. Racing has been part of our culture for centuries. I know a lot about horses. I used to have a horse farm. I'm right now working with a contributor to this book I'm working on. He's designed a saddle that is less hurtful to the horse, trying to do the right thing. But if you look from what they from the shoes on their hooves, to the bits in their mouths, to the saddles on their backs, to they don't have blinders on, but they often have blinders. This is an engineered system for a benefit. It's okay. Is it ethical? We have not yet decided that it's not. We don't have laws or policies to tell us that it's not. We don't have practices to tell us that it's not. Individuals might be concerned, but the culture is still engaged in a way that engineering is required, the track, the design of the track, it's all in engineers. Okay. So what are some of the ideological roots of our relationship with animals? You know, we still seem to have to pay homage to the real guys. But I feel that in this case, I want to say, you know, you're part of the reason you're on. So with the car, animals were machines. Okay? They were mechanical pieces. Actually, we were too, but we were more important. We were distinctive in the way he saw our machinery, but they didn't have consciousness. They couldn't feel. He was really influential in Western thinking. Spinoza supposedly takes a different approach, but from my reading, it was sort of like we use them, we need them, so we use them for our benefit. And Kant, he's sort of such a foundation of Western thinking about ethics. Same school of thought. They don't matter. They don't matter. We can use them as things to use. We can't use other people as things to mean. That's unethical. So for me to use you for something that I need for myself without thinking about who you are is unethical. Not so with animals. That was. There is movement since 200 years ago. That's why we now have very specific rules for what you can do in the laboratory. There's movement. There's a change. There's something called the animal term in literature. Much more widely about concern for animals in the academic literature than there was even 50 years ago. So something shifted. Something shifted. At the same time, we're still pretty central. So the tragedy of 9/11 is with our culture deeply. It will always be with us. I think it is for a while. So we have a commemoration, right? And they designed something spectacular as a commemoration. But unfortunately, it was designed without thinking about the flight patterns of birds. And now it's pretty seriously disruptive. Does it matter? Does it matter? What's more important? Or can we engineer differently? Can we create a commemoration thinking about animals that might be involved and design differently? Well, yeah, but the values have to be there. The values have to be there. And that was not a consideration because that was not a value in the design. So engineers work from specifications, and oftentimes they work from specifications. There might be a call out for an engineer system. The firm will say, we're going to bid on that. And then they get it and they the specifications for the design. I don't know about any design specifications that say take care of avoiding harmful animals. That would be unusual. Is it possible? I don't know. No. Unless that's specifically what the project is for, and I will show you one word specifically for that, but ultimately for us, and I'll show you that example. Okay, so next slide, please. Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about birds because we have a really serious problem. Really serious problem. We are losing them rapidly. Rapidly. Next slide, because that speaks for itself. At the same time, we're making an effort. Right? What can we do? What can we do? We're going to have one analysis. This is a new era. They were killing birds. Designers figure out, wait a minute, paint one of the blades black, it doesn't kill as many birds. There we go. Okay, different value set in the design. So then the apparatus changes because the values have shifted. It mattered that the birds were gone. So there are other declines we know about, other declines, some of which are because of our change in the climate, which is related to our consumption of fossil fuels, which is related to engineering, and a lot of struggles with that too. Unintended consequences of engineering, when we really wanted to do something helpful to humanity, you know, maintain consequences, and we're living within our own your generation, so I always apologize. You know, we didn't really know what we were doing, we left, we were, wow, with heavy responsibility going forward. Okay, so why does it matter? We'll get to that. That is not, excuse me, you go forward, we might have to come back to that. Okay, go back. All right, so, let's talk about whales. There was supposed to be a really nice smooth transition to this, but I'm just jumping in. Right? So I mentioned fossil fuels. We need them, at least we thought we needed them. We didn't have alternatives. We need energy. We are energy hungry species, and it makes our lives much more comfortable than it would have been without them, because when we didn't have energy, it was sort of rough going. Not so rough anymore. But before we had known about fossil fuels and oils, we needed another source of energy. And for a while, whales were a primary source of energy. The industry was huge in this state, huge. So we ate them, we used them for materials, we used them for light, for soap, machinery, lubricants, etc. I just came back from Nantucket and went to the Whaling Museum. I'm very interested in whales, partly because of what's happened to them. So this was hundreds of years, but we couldn't do it without engineering. For a long time, at least in this country, Native Americans in New England, like the Wampanoag tribe, for example, used whales, but they washed up. So for one reason or another, they washed up to sea, and they were considered a gift. And then they would take them all apart and they would use them. And then when the explorers and others came over and saw, they were taught, right? Although there was whaling in the Northern European ones, but they were taught different uses that they weren't familiar with. And then some of the tribal people became very involved in boats. There was sort of mutual learning and mutual understanding one thing to another. And they found that the right whale was a particular kind of whale in New England, and they called it the right whale because that one provided so much of what they could use, and they were relatively easy to get because they were close in, et cetera, et cetera. So they went out for right whales, and then over time, you can switch to the next slide. Technologies rose that made it possible to go further and further and further. So what they could do is they could go out to deeper water, they could find other kinds of whales, and they could bring them up onto the ship and disassemble them there. And once the apparatus was involved for that, then the industry took off, and it went all over the world. People, you know, who left New England and went into the Pacific and the Straits and everywhere. And so whaling has continued until this, partly because the engineering has made it possible to be more efficient. So next slide, please. Here's the problem. Okay, so here's some of the examples of the engineering that's required for the whaling. Next slide, yeah. At some point we figured out, there aren't that many left. Like, we have over hundreds of whales. And so bans came into place. We still have 3 countries that are continuing to do large-scale whaling operations, but there's like a national and international accord, and for the most part, we're not whaling anymore. Next slide. And we have this Endangered Species Act with the right whale, because the right whale in particular went from between 9 and 21,000 to 340 left. That's it. And they're in Massachusetts. That's it. So what? Got a problem? Did we do something wrong? Was whaling unethical? Why? We needed them. So the other thing about whales that concerns me, and this is because plastics have been an amazing gift to humanity in so many ways. We can store food in ways we couldn't store before. A lot of what hospitals can do, we can do because of plastics. We can transport things that we couldn't transport before. Plastics has been a game changer for humanity, but we didn't know how to design them for the time. We weren't thinking about or valuing them, having them together. So now what we've got is a problem. We're still killing whales indirectly because they're ingesting our waste. Could we engineer a kind of material like plastic that doesn't have an effect on animals in the way? Doesn't matter. Why would we? Well, you're probably saying, don't answer this for this question, is it repairable? Excellent. So they went into boats, the sonar systems from some submarines, etc., throw them off track. It's just really hard for them to survive in our engineered world. So what if they go on? What if there are no wells? What if they're driven before the right wells are gone because of our engineered world? Doesn't matter. Did we do the wrong thing? Okay, well, probably so. Our wellness is, so just from a strictly anthropocentric sense, our wellness is linked to the wellness of the animals in the ocean directly. We probably miss them. So I love whales. I would miss them. It would make me very sad if they were gone. Here's the ethical question. Do we have a duty to protect? Are we responsible for their well-being? Or how do you get an answer to that? We know we're responsible for our children and our parents, maybe to some extent our neighbors. I feel responsibility for my students. I don't want to hurt them. Okay. But whales live in the ocean. Why would we be responsible? Why would we be responsible for that? And they're not human. They're not human. So for the most part, except in research ethics, because of the direct harm that's caused, that we now are saying, no, hold on, slow down. I don't know what you say about flies, but I know with primates, we're very, very particular about what we do. Well, slow down. Why would we feel responsible for sea animals? Why would we have moral obligation, a duty to protect and care for them? Why? Well, maybe because they're sentient, and sentience comes with the capacity to suffer. Maybe we have a responsibility to minimize the suffering of other sentient beings. I don't know. Do we? So when it comes to, and we know much more than we used to know about the capacity of animals to feel, to relate, to socialize. He said, flies play. I can tell you one thing I know about horses, they actually have a moral code. How is that? Like, how is that? That they have a moral code. There's certain things they cannot and should not do or it's wrong. They actually have roles and responsibilities and duties in the herd. So, for example, a lead mare is responsible for the well-being of the herd. That's her job. And then you have the sentinel who's responsible for watching out to make sure predators don't. And so there's like 7 different roles in a herd that keeps their society functioning well, keeps them caring for one another so they can thrive. Well, that's what we do. Do we need to do that for other human animals? Well, maybe if our engineered systems impact them, we do. Maybe because of what we do and the way it affects them, we do. Maybe not For animals, we have no apparent connection to, although these days everything seems to be connected, but the argument can be made that wild animals that we have no impact on, so we don't have the same story, but now we do have impact on them, right now. Yeah, there we go. We're all impacted, we're all in the suit together. Okay, so. So I'm coming around the bend here towards the end. So we could say, well, maybe we could develop a form of ethics that acknowledges sentience and goes from there. And people are working on this. If you're sentient, if you can feel, then I have an obligation to take care of my actions in a way that do not impact on your capacity to live well, on your suffering and sentence. We don't actually do this very well with humans here. I don't think. I mean, I have a whole issue around incarceration and how we handle that. Yeah, we still harm each other. We still harm each other. But we think about that another person is suffering. At least we have the capacity, and it's in our general frame of ethics to think about another person's suffering. If we could think about animal suffering, would we design engineering systems differently? What would that look? Would that look? The other way we could go is just compare ethics, which we do. We do that in the medical setting more and more and more. There's more writing in the last 3 decades, much more writing about what Gilligan started out 4 decades ago, thinking about because we care, we act in certain ways, we make certain choices. I know that we care about our domestic pets. Why would that be? That's a mutual relationship. We need them.
Part of the family.
That's enlightened self-interest, right? They're ours. They help us. We need them. We love them. We don't want to live without them. I guess I'll feed them. I guess I'll let them sleep in my bed. It feels good, right? We don't so much do that with the bonobos, right? In Uganda. Why not? They're distant. We don't see them. Doesn't matter so much. So the enlightened self-interest piece comes into our design. It comes into our ethics. It comes into our codes. Protect humans, keep humans safe from our engineering systems. We don't know what we're talking about. I think that there's an argument to be made that we can change the curriculum so that we do, so that we can skill our engineering students and others with the capacity to think about these questions in their designs. Why not? Why not? I don't know why not. It might cost us a little bit more, but you know, what's the other cost? What's the cost of not doing this? That's the question. So what would that look like? Well, this is an engineer. Her name is Rosalyn Berne. Temple had a gift, and it's a gift that came partly because of what we would call a disability. She's got Asperger's syndrome. And because of her way of being in the world as a child, she needed to be sort of comforted by being wrapped in tight spaces. It helped her to be calm. And over time, what she discovered was she could understand how animals feel in certain situations. She now has redesigned the way cattle go through the process of being slaughtered. What happened is that the industry was losing a lot of good meat because cattle were freezing. They were fearful. They could sense that their demise was coming in the systems that they were walking through these cattle, I don't know what you call them, but system where they were going from one place through to the slaughter. They could feel it, they could probably smell it, hear it, they were freezing up. Their adrenaline was going high. High adrenaline in the meat was making the quality of the meat bad. The whole system was inefficient. It could be argued that that was another anthropocentric move of enlightened self-interest, but at least what she's done is she's redesigned the whole system based on her sense she walked through that provisional system, she could sense what the cows were feeling. And she thought, I know how to change this, so that at least they're calm when they're going to slaughter. So her system has been incorporated pretty widely, and it's, you know, it makes it so that they're less aware as they're going through. And is that a good thing? Probably they're suffering less. They're still being eaten, they're still being slaughtered, but a lot of people depend on beef. And so the industry thrives because that's what many, many people need. At least she's done it in a way that they're suffering less in the process. So that's my closing argument to say there is a way to design, to engineer with a mind of sentience. She felt what they were feeling and thought, this is not acceptable. I will redesign, re-engineer so that they don't feel fear in this way. I think that's the last slide, except I have one that says, do you have any comments?
Thanks, Trent. Yeah, I'm happy to moderate questions. We've got them, and folks online, if you have questions, feel free to raise your hand, unmute, type them, whatever you'd like to do.
You know, we're just that question, just to read off. So we have to eat. Yes. So how far do we go? I mean, you know, thinking about how pigs, cows, chickens are farmed, it is often inhumane. So I want to extend this a little further. If we all stopped eating meat, for example, or are there humane ways? Is it ethical to have humane ways to farm animals for food? But what about plants?
That's a great.
Because at that point we start to think. Okay, and so maybe the world is better off than we're all.
It might be.
But we are part of the ecosystem. as
For
well.
now. Okay, so that's two really big questions. What about plants? If that's tricky, that's a tricky one, because there is now research to suggest plants are sentient as well. There's a botanist named Stefano Mancuso. I went to see him in Italy. He says plants are intelligent. And he said, let's figure out how we define intelligence. I define it by the ability to solve problems. They're really good problem solvers. Not only that, they're competitive. They're manipulative. They're crafty.
They are survivors.
They are survivors like the rest of us. They will emit chemicals, change their chemicals to attract, to support their lives, emit chemicals to protect themselves, to kill animals that are invading them. That's incredible. So if the question is it right to eat something that's sentient or that's intelligent? We're in dangerous territory there. Okay? And that makes it a different sort of paradigm to work with. There's exceptionalism. You can say, yeah, they're sentient, they're intelligent, but we have no choice, we have to eat them. Okay, if we're gonna survive, we have to eat them. Or, you know, there's the argument, well, I don't see a way out of that one. I think we have to eat plants.
Can we draw a comparison here? Is it legitimate to, I'll make this comparison. The animals do it to each other.
That's true.
They kill and eat other animals
Yeah.
because that's how they survive.
Right, the natural order.
Does that make our behavior different?
Yes. So if you want to see us as it's part of the natural order, and we're behaving as all animals do. Well, horses are vegetarians. Cattle are vegetarians. It's amazing. They're so powerful and strong. How are they doing that? But they don't. So, but other primates, I mean, other mammals do. It is an argument that is often made. Isn't that our nature? Isn't that the nature of life? Isn't that how things work? It's an argument to be made. It's a moral claim. There are others who will make a different claim. Part of what we're up to with ethics is we are out narrating each other until one wins over the other. We keep doing it. So another narrative would say, no, because we don't have to. It's not a requirement for us. We have an alternative. The lion may not have an alternative, but we do. We can engineer systems of food to feed us and give us the nutrients we need. And therefore, because we don't have to, we ought not to. That's an argument. Depends on your values. Depends on your values. If you want to uphold the reduced suffering of others at your hand, and that's your primary value, then you engineer with that. If you have another set of primary values, Jonathan, you can help me out here anytime, all right? You could go in another way. Our responsibility primarily, first and foremost, is to have our children be healthy and strong. And the best way we know to do that is with protein directly from animals. Now, that there are arguments that are engineered proteins, and I get a lot of beyond meat, are actually not healthy for us. That's coming. It's coming forward. It's like, oh shoot, I thought I was doing the right thing, right? So
Yeah, the food question is tough, and
yeah,
one of our folks online, Camille, seconded, Lori, your suggestion that maybe it's the too many people problem.
that's part of it.
Maybe that
Yeah.
we wouldn't be having these conversations about engineering better food systems if we needed less food, if there were fewer or less to eat. You might be still having the animal ethics conversation, but not the confinement agriculture conversation.
The industrialization of the process. The other thing, that I'm inclined to give some credence to is, and back to my husband's comment, being conscientious and aware and in your choices. So to me, there's a certain level of sort of responsibility to know what you are eating and to be clear of what you are eating, and then to make that decision and live with it. I have taken another life for the sake of my own. I'm living with it. I think part of the problem is that the way we've engineered such things, we don't have to be conscious. We can act without awareness. So certainly there are practices where people give thanks to the animal that they are about to eat and acknowledging that the life that was sacrificed for them. Does that help? For many people it does.
Question, like this one, like the news, for example, when they killed an animal, they like did this ritual where they respected it and they were like, thank you for like letting yourself be killed to eat us. And that was kind of their philosophy. Whereas when we eat animals, we just eat them without like, like we use like that's the way yes for having. So like my question is, does therefore like ethics depend not only on the action but also like the intention and the accountability?
I believe so. What do you think, Jonathan? Here's another ethicist who's interested in animals.
Yeah, I mean, there's whole myriad of traditions, right?
Yeah.
So traditions that prioritize our intentions, traditions which prioritize our outcomes at the expense of our intentions. So, yeah, I think indigenous traditions have prioritized for different reasons than like continents did. The idea of intention, like how we approach and relate to the world, matters a great deal. It's not, we're not morally responsible for accidents. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. That the tradition that sentience arose out of, sentience theory, is very much on the ends of our actions. So intentions didn't play that big a deal. It's really like when you do something in the world, how much suffering does it bring about? So it's just two different approaches to think about the same topic.
And consequentialism is like, what's the outcome? Versus virtue, like what does a good person do?
Yeah, right.
So virtue ethics, and what are my intentions? How do I know I'm a good person? How do I control a good person? The outcome is less than good.
Can I push that a little bit further? So I like the argument that intentionality maybe changes the moral calculation, that if you thank the animal that you're about to consume or say grace, that maybe somehow that shows consciousness and awareness of the circumstance, and there's a different moral standard there. But I can think of specific more normative codes and moral traditions who would say grace and at the same time would also think it is their duty to procreate as much as possible, which takes us back to the prior argument that maybe the problem is the population. So is it enough to just say you have a moral code that's guiding you, or are we kind of forced to do something more than just ask ourselves questions and try to help self-awareness? Is there actually maybe a call to move beyond the individual value toward a societal value and start having maybe a forced and engaged conversation about what are the right values? Because I'm very comfortable in the notion that we can talk about this and now I can go off and eat beef, but maybe that's the wrong answer. Maybe we need to solve the problem. So how do we move toward that?
You mean with more of a collective awareness?
Yeah, I'm asking, is there more of a moral call than just discussing it and being comfortable with our own moral reasoning as individuals?
Yeah, education is important. I admittedly have a big family. I have 4 kids, and one of them was, 2 of them were extremely involved in Future Farmers of America, for example. And it is noticeable in those 2 that they don't waste food. And why? Because they have that knowledge, education, and appreciation for what it's all about. And it kind of gets back to what you were saying earlier, that we don't really have an understanding when we push our cart to the grocery store. And so I think we can help alleviate some of the waste. The food that's wasted in this country is unbelievable, and it's throughout the world. So, you know, one of those ways could be to educate students and people and just let them know, hey, all of this went into what you're about to just waste or throw away. So that might be one way to.
So the connection between your question and your response is, so what do we teach them? And who decides what we teach them? That's where it gets, this is your work. Who decides what's in the curriculum? And so is it just a matter of practicality? If we're going to survive as a nation, as a world, we have to change X, Y, Z. So that goes to policies, right? What's that's got to do with the individual's choices? Well, it's a competitive process to decide which body of ethics moves our policies and leads to our curriculum changes. It's competitive. So what is it? I don't know. Alistair McIntyre, I think his name. He wrote a book called Which Ethics, Whose Rationality, or Whose Ethics, Which Rationality. So that's a hard one. The fact is that the cows burping is causing a lot of problems with emissions that affect greenhouses. So the industry itself is part of the problem of our warming. Why aren't we changing it? Collectively, what's it going to take for individual beliefs and practices to show up in collective changes and make a difference?
I like that train of thought, and I think that we kind of focus a lot on individual responsibility, which is important because that's mostly what we can do. But I remember in the past, at least where I grew up, you know, my grandparents didn't eat meat all the time. They didn't have access to it. It was a special occasion. A lot of people in countries that are not Western don't have that same access to meat, like eating meat for every meal. So I think there's something to be said, like you said, about the values within engineering, right? Because there's that profit motive. There's people who are willing to make meat so accessible to us. And when it is accessible, people will eat it, not think about it twice. So perhaps, you know, that's a better target for policy reform. And then people just adjust, right? People adjust their expectations. People survived and thrived for centuries without having meat with every meal. Some just had meat on special occasions or once a week or whatever that may be. So as much as I, you know, love to think that education and social movements and, you know, doing things that we can, and there is this place, of course, for social movements in terms of creating these more structural changes, because I don't think the industry will change on its own. But I do think perhaps we need to start thinking more broadly in terms of the scope of the changes that we need to make, rather than, you know, have just these discussions on what is the right thing to do and what can I do on my own to mitigate a bit the impact of this suffering and on climate and so on.
So I want to go back to the suggestion that if we were willing to incorporate some of this into the curriculum, in education, engineering curriculum, like even earlier, would that help us move more collectively? I don't know. I mean, if you sit down to a state and you say, okay, so how much of the rainforest in the Amazon came down because of getting this to me? And you start there, and you bring it all the way up to what it took to get it on your plate. It might be a more difficult decision, but there's a lot we don't think about. There's a lot we don't know. It's a lot that's not in our concern. We haven't been educated.
Right. Okay. Not to interrupt from this perspective, but to what extent when we talk about like animal ethics, it's also just like being more aware about the environmental aspects.
Okay,
And like especially when we talk about the ocean area where like what I do isn't just gonna stay in one place, but kind of like dissipates in a much broader undefined area.
So I'm agreeing with you. What do you think of that?
Just it's like if I find like say there's an abandoned building that's like roughly what I want to like, and I want to build something, is it ethical to just break that down, maybe build a bigger foundation, maybe widen the sidewalks, or go to like dig out a new area and like start from scratch?
Yeah, see, it's all connected, isn't it? All of our decisions around engineering and design and how we live, they're so obviously connected to us, nobody even realized before. Right? So we're talking about wasted material, we're talking about new infrastructure, we're talking about, and all of it ultimately impacts all of us, including other animals. What are we gonna do?
I've got one question online. I've got a question on my own, but I want to draw an example. There's been some really fascinating engineering design work done for food production overseas.
Yeah.
So China just released functionally an apartment building for pigs, which is just confinement agriculture built up. So to the footprint question, right, rather than having what we do in the US, which is large, wide-reaching buildings, they built a structure that goes up. And it processes millions of pigs a day in order to feed a growing population. But that is an engineering decision that was based on material needs, footprint size of buildings and infrastructure, and human consumptive needs, but not necessarily animal ethics needs. So those value trade-offs are real. Rosa, I wanted to bring you back around to the engineering question because we talked a lot about engineering, especially in the food context, engineering confinement agriculture operations. So this is the Temple Grandin work on cattle chutes. It's the Bernie Rollin work on veal crate and sow stalls. But there's another interesting option available to us. And I'm sure you know this paper too, but Paul Thompson at Michigan wrote this paper on the blind chicken problem.
He's writing for the book.
Not at all surprised. Thompson is the Kellogg Chair of Agricultural Ethics at Michigan State. He decades ago now, he wrote this paper on called the blind chicken problem. And he said, look, redefining our food systems is one thing, but why don't we just redefine our food? And so he said, look, the problem with confinement agriculture for chickens, one of them, is that chickens require a lot of intense lighting and air changes so they don't self-predate, so they don't kill each other, right? We solve those problems now by all these convoluted, spacing needs and whatever. But he said, look, you could solve that by just engineering your chickens to be blind. And if you just did that, you just genetically modified your chickens such that they couldn't see, they would no longer have that avian instincts to peck at each other and injure each other. And he said, like, what's wrong with that? So that's option 2. And then option 3 is like, why don't we redesign our food products? And this came from Camille online. Why don't we just redesign our food packaging to be more transparent, more representative of what we're actually eating? So there are engineering options that seem to, even just on the food topic, that are so diverse. Like, how do we choose the best option? Like, what should we teach our young engineers
That's a really interesting question about the packaging, by the way.
Yeah,
If
I
you
like that.
imagine a package, it's not clear something, but it's the photo of the actual cow that you're about to eat.
I know they did it for cigarettes, like back when I was huge, they did package like disease lungs and like what killing you, that's how we reduce smoking, like
That's
overall.
true. Yeah, yeah.
Right, so I'm wondering how that might work with like, meat products and that type.
But they wouldn't do that in the industry. Why in the world would they do that? You know?
The only reason
They
it's
wanna
back
sell
industry is because of lawsuits, right?
Right, exactly. That's not, there's no motivation to do that when you're trying to sell your product.
Ross, we have a question from Stephen Hall online about how far down what he calls the evolutionary chain
Right,
do we apply moral considerability?
well, that's a question.
The
Well,
plant's
it's-
question to him.
And do we want to use sentience as our determinant, right? In which case, there's a great book called, How Do We Know How Smart Animals Are? We don't know a lot. We don't know a lot about the crawfish and the shrimp. Flies play, that fascinates me. So I think in the past, we've valued foods around intelligence, right? Higher order beings that we could relate to, beings that have eyes, etc. We have hierarchies. We've always had hierarchies. We've had it with each other. We have it with animals. So how far do we want to go down? We're in this together. We're evolving together. Our consciousness is shifting together as we learn and try to survive our mistakes in this world. Morally speaking, you could argue life is life, but then we're back to the plants. There's a community in India, I don't know if they're still out and about, but there were the Jains. And the Jains, I did a graduate study in India. They sweep the ground gently in front of them so as not to step on any living being, let alone not eat. They would not want to do harm to anyone. I don't know that they know the research on plants, but it might have messed it up for them. But that's new learning that we have, and we're always learning. That's the beauty of it. We're always learning, and we're still asking questions. More and more, we're asking questions. Who are animals? What are animals? What is their life like? What is their capacity like? Do they reason? Do they recognize themselves in the mirror? Well, some do. We know that. Do they play? Do they love? And as we continue to ask these questions and learn, I think we will evolve our relationships with animals. That's my hope. That's because I'm an optimist, and I hope we're growing and evolving. I hope we are.
So I'm a conservation biologist, and I work with sea turtles actually, but we think sort of big picture of the ocean as an ecosystem. So I might not care about that crab's feelings, but I care that it exists in the heart of the food chain and to support everything. And we also, because we work with protected species, like you mentioned, with the right whales, we have to operate under the Endangered Species Act, which kind of gives you like forced thought about engineering. So for example, right now our lab is we monitor a large treasure beach on the east coast of Florida, where the hurricanes hammer the coast, people live there, and sand gets brought in to replace what is lost because the community needs their sand. They don't want their houses to fall in the ocean. The county also frames it as the sea turtles need a place to nest because we've disrupted the natural movement of the islands. But when they come in and do these huge engineering projects, it's unbelievable what they do to put the sand on the beach. They have to think about the turtles that are still nesting on the beach. The turtles that are in the water when they're running this huge dredge that could suck up the turtles. So there's kind of some forced engineering solutions. Some of it is paying turtle people to go out and move the nests out of the way.
But because they're endangered.
Because they're protected.
Protected.
Yeah, and for example, on the dredge, they put a shield at the end of their dredge to hopefully not suck up turtles. There were targeted monitors out on the dredges. We're out moving nests out of the way. We think about timelines based on the turtle nesting season, and the county is motivated not only because the people are screaming about, oh no, my house is going to fall in the ocean, but also because the turtles, it's one of the most densely nested places in the world, and it is the most densely nested place within the U.S. But the county also says, well, we don't do this harm this way, somebody's gonna go talk to their county commissioner and change the law about seawalks, which is probably the worst engineering solution that we can have, because the sand just goes away permanently. So we think about engineering kind of weird way in intersection with the Endangered Species Act, and it's sort of a forced conversation in those kind of arenas. And I think agriculture is probably a little behind on us, sort of forced conversations, because we value these protected animals differently. But I sort of think about the protected animals' entire habitat and their ecosystem.
And they're protected partly because we were losing them.
Because we were losing them, and in the case of sort of the original protected species, there are things that we liked. We know the sea turtles, the whales, the tigers, even things that don't exist in the US are protected in some way by our country. At least you can't import them, in unreasonable ways.
We have another question online. Take it. This one comes from Dr. Pickett. Dr. Pickett, do you want to try to speak your question?
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
You can.
Hooray.
Oh, try this.
Are you able to hear me?
Sure.
Thank you so much, Dr. Berne. I really enjoyed the presentation. I've been thinking about your comment earlier that we often act without awareness. And so I'm wondering if you can help me. I'm an optimist too, and I want to have some hope. I think most of us are in higher education, but I also feel like higher education is being engineered in some ways to reduce those opportunities to really do deep thinking and become aware. And that's both a speed question. So we need to get as many students out as quickly as possible. And also, I think maybe influences of capitalistic and corporatized interests. And so I'm wondering if you, maybe two questions, if you think higher ed will continue to be a space for these possibilities to emerge, whether in research or in teaching. And if you have one, can you give us an example of that kind of practical output of one of those philosophical shifts or value shifts that you're suggesting we might make today?
Okay, two questions. I'll address the first, and I'm gonna have to ask for clarification about the second. I'm a little concerned about higher ed right now. To me, it was always the place for fundamental awareness, intellectual growth, change of consciousness. It always was. I feel a little tearful actually just responding to the question. We're in a different time right now. And so I don't know. Even secondary.
I feel that strongly in Florida right now too.
Well, I don't want to say anything, but I'm aware of where I am right now. But I'm watching other states follow that lead, and I'm watching politics get in, and she said corporate interests get in. There's a certain company, I will not mention their names. Every year they ask if they can come give a talk in my class. No. I don't trust your motive. So I want to protect the capacity to think freely and learn together and evolve and change as we learn. I want to do that. I don't know how. So that my optimism there, I tried hard to hold on to my optimism. But as they say, the pendulum always swings. Maybe some way we'll have no choice. Maybe we're getting to a point where we're going to have to figure things out differently. Now, the other question, what was that? An example of?
It might be moot because my question is, I love the Temple Grandin example, and I know she is affiliated with an institution of higher education, but I don't think that change came about because she was connected to one. And so I wondered if you had an example of a place where people are making these kinds of changes, albeit maybe not to the extent you're arguing today, but if you could, share with us where you see it happening in higher ed. So we might take a look at those for models or opportunities.
Well, I think the work of Dr. Jonathan Bieber is really important. There are more and more people coming forward, bringing animal consideration into teaching about ethics. I think there's hope there. That's relatively new. As I said, there's more in the literature. I wish I had a specific example. Maybe you do. I don't. I mean, one reason I'm doing this new book is because I'm not seeing textbooks that include this material. I want to, before I leave my professional life and go do something different, I want to leave that behind, like shake it up a little bit, like bring this to students, bring these questions to bear. But I'm sure there must be others. I just don't know. In my literature review, I did not see much.
It's hard for me because
Thanks.
when I think about the way that we use technology for the benefit of animals, it comes out of biology. I mean, it's, you know, the sort of soundscape work that I do is driven by technologies that are built to better understand animal communication.
Right.
Like those technologies are designed for a specific purpose that is not anthropocentric directly. It's ecological in this robust way. And then there's the other series of shifts that I always point to is in ethics and applied ethics. There's a shift from species levels concerned that the sentience theory came about in the 70s, and it's where conservation biology arose towards now moral particularism. So folks are interested in connecting to individual organisms, not as members of their species, but in and of themselves.
Like we do with humans.
Yeah, and my students always point me, and I remember watching this same thing, but the Netflix documentary, My Octopus Teacher, you all seen that?
Of course.
Yeah, it's this like, it's kind of an overwrought dramatic story, but it's a filmmaker who went diving and met a young octopus and then dove with it every day for a year. And this wasn't a story about cephalopods. This was a story about that octopus.
That relationship.
And that kind of particularism is a really significant shift.
It's true.
Yeah.
There is, okay, and now I'm remembering the work of Denise Herzog. She's from, what is it, Georgia? Maybe Georgia Tech. She's an engineer who's been trying to create an underwater apparatus that allows humans and dolphins to communicate with one another. In that it interprets dolphin clicks and translates them, and then the human clicks back to try to, and that's particularism, and that's around communicating with individual dolphins in their domain underwater. Her work is interesting. Now, is that about ethics? That's more around engineering and biology and trying to figure out, like, who are we in relation to these other animals? How do we reach them? How do we understand them more directly?
Stephen Hall online wants your thoughts on xenotransplantation.
Oh boy.
Which made the news this week again
How?
because
What
a
happened?
pig heart successfully has lasted in a xenotransplanted patient longer than anyone anticipated it would.
I
Right?
remember
So,
when that went in.
yeah, right. So that patient is still alive, which is pretty remarkable. I don't know if you want to comment.
I would really like it if we could grow our own organs from our own DNA, from our own material. And aren't we working on that?
Yes,
Yeah.
Ideally, to me, that's what we want to do.
and it's not that far away, maybe a decade or two,
Right.
and we'll be there.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. And I'm excited that we'll get to it. In the meanwhile, you know, we keep making ourselves more important. Is that okay? I don't know that that's okay. I don't know that that's okay. If I were on my deathbed and a pig could keep me alive for another decade, personally, I would struggle.
And could I spin that question on?
Please.
What if it's your child? So myself, yeah, I could make that decision for me.
Okay, did the person asking hear the response? What if it's your child?
Stephen, did you hear the question that that was asked was about what if it was your child, not you, for the xenotransplantation?
Okay, so what's the right thing to do? Right now, Our belief system is that we have a moral obligation to care for and protect our children, bottom line. Is there an exception to that in any case? Like, would we make an exception to that if it required the sacrifice of the life of another animal? Well, we do it when we say, ask a sibling to donate a kidney. And that for a long time in bioethics was considered wrong. Because what you do is you compromise the wellness of the child that had two by sacrificing the one for the other. And then all the unintended consequences of what if it fails and the burden. So as painful as it is, I think we still have to ask the question about, do we avoid death at all costs? Is death sometimes an inevitable end for our lives, shorter than we want to be, and at what cost are we willing to make sacrifices to protect it? As far as animal ethics is concerned, I don't have an answer to that question. If it was my child, I would want to protect my child. I don't know enough about what it means. There's a really interesting book written by a heart surgeon who discovered, after doing many, many heart transplants, that people receiving hearts were picking up characteristics of the people who donated them, the deceased people. Odd things, like, for example, a person who never liked chocolate received the heart of somebody who was a chocoholic and started craving chocolate. Right. So just biologically, I hesitate. I don't want to put a pig's liver in my child because I don't know what it means. Biologically, I will know that it's the best thing just because it's functional. But morally speaking, that's tricky. Is the value of the pig to be raised, is the pig being breeded, bred, and protected and fed so that it can be a donor? Is that okay? Apparently, we decided it is because we're doing it.
Part of the reason we decided that is because of the huge bioethics literature on donor babies, right?
Right.
Parents who would, through IVF, create a duplicate version of a kid who might have a genetic disorder, basically just so that they could then donate organs to their sibling. That sort of paternalism bioethics is frowned on for a couple of decades. So now we've been like, well, don't worry. Until on our way to grow our own replacement parts. Yeah, the landscape is fascinating.
Great question.
Could we approach the donation like the pig valve the similar way we do our own organ donor programs for pigs?
But they don't have the capacity to offer their organs. We can fill out a donor card that says, I'm happy to donate my organs. They don't have the capacity because we make that decision for them.
But if they're being slaughtered for food, I mean.
Well, what's the difference you're saying? What's the
Well, I'm not saying, I'm just saying if they're being used for food, is
Same
there a part that could be used for good or other good of the valve? I don't know.
Oh, you mean after they're dead?
Yes.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Right. 'Cause
It seems wacky, but. it's
Right,
just-
right.
That's interesting. And I know just enough here to be dangerous, but I'm pretty sure that the lines of pigs we produce for food are distinct from the lines of pigs we produce for parts.
Oh, okay.
That was-
Well, that
So
was my
We
question.
basically like duplicating systems here.
Oh, you're thinking about not wasting. Where we
Yes.
can- Yeah.
Yeah, I'm an environmental engineer, so
Uh,
I'm always about that.
I would assume pigs that are used for zip grass have been somehow immunologically compromised.
Correct. In order to they don't make it sick.
So that you don't have rejection.
Yeah.
It's spread.
This person has a deep in their comment, and I also want to know what the person who asked the question thinks to answer their own question.
Okay, oh, crap, Steve.
Okay.
Like that would like also like kind of like make us treat the kids better. It's like they have to be in bed
For us.
For us. Like it would be selfish, but it'd still be beneficial for the kids. So like for example, this was like yeah, it would be more
Good point. Unless we're having to modify them or say, I don't know what that experience is like. for them. Maybe they're better off. You know. That's a good question. What does that person think? What's the answer to their question?
Stephen, do you want to respond to the xenotransplantation question?
I would struggle with the question as well, but I think that I would side on having the pig organ to save my child.
Well,
Can I follow up on that a little bit? I've heard some people think about values and moral systems and try to categorize how we approach moral questions. And one that comes up is an issue of autonomy, right? Another one is sanctity. And I wonder, we've discussed two issues and I wonder how they map on the sanctity. One was maybe engineering a chicken that is blind is an abomination, is abhorrent in some way. It seemed like, there was a vibe that I think I felt in the room that people were thinking, oh no, we wouldn't want to do that. To me, that kind of rings of a sanctity issue. I'm interested that we might, the majority of people, I don't know, I'm guessing here, but many might be abhorrent of modifying the chicken to be blind, but would still be okay with having an animal organ transplanted into, say, themselves or their child. Just thinking about sanctity, do you find that ethical conversations about this see those as incongruous or?
So when I think about the principles of bioethics developed by Toldus Buchan, autonomy is the first one. Sanctity was not in the language. That's not a word that I've seen much in the literature. Have you seen that word used?
Well, this is where knowing just a little bit of stuff is dangerous. So not necessarily coming out of ethics literature, but psychology literature.
Psychology and it shows up now in the moral psychology literature.
Sanctity.
Yeah, sanctity, yeah, as a one of the framing foundations that some of us carry around with us.
I mean, I think of it in terms of my religious studies background. You certainly heard it in that context. I've heard it in philosophy, engineering, ethics, but so the honoring and the respect of life in and of itself.
Yeah, or that, if people would make a strong distinction between human and non-human animals, would they embrace xenotransplantation? Because wouldn't that be perverting or destroying the sanctity of the individual to then have an animal organ inside of them? I don't have that kind of feeling. I'm just thinking about the logic of these arguments and, could you find someone who has a strong sense of what I've called sanctity?
Absolutely.
And would not want to modify the chicken, but would have a xenotransplant? I don't know.
Oh, I see. It would be like a contradiction.
That's what I'm wondering, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so the argument that I'm a human, not a pig, and to take a pig into me perverts, disrespects, takes away the sanctity of the creation that I am.
I wondered, yeah, I'm just wondering, do people choose not to do that because of that kind of reason?
Well, we've got the issue around, what's the word? When we mix DNA of different animals, what's the word? Chimeras. You know that. That's a whole other question. It's in the same territory.
Okay.
Right. I have a science fiction book I wrote 13 years ago where with chimeras just because we could. Just because it's like, well, we can take some of the characteristics of the cat and mix it with the characteristics of a rabbit, we're going to end up with a rabbit. We can have something entirely different that serves us better. So the question of could and should goes back to the question that you're asking.
Right. Which has been done. I mean, that's been
Absolutely, because we can.
Green fluorescent protein's been mixed into all kinds of species.
Absolutely, absolutely. So back to the fundamental questions of ethics. Why are we doing this? Is it the right thing? How do we know it's the right thing? Now we're asking that question about other than human animals that are aware, that feel, that play, that love possibly, that bond, that relate. A new territory.
Can I pull us back around to the education question? So I'm trying to think like your call is that we should engineer for less suffering. I mean, this seems like the approach that you're proposing in the talk. And then there's the question of how we do that. So there's a curriculum question. And that gets me thinking about the distinction we make between theoretical and applied ethics.
Right.
We've talked about applied issues, and I've tried to list some for my own edification, but food questions, medical use, cosmetics, which may be resolved, entertainment, energy, conservation, right? There's all kinds of applied issues. Do we start there? Oh, excuse me. Or do we lean into the theoreticals? When we're trying to teach engineers, do we start them on the moral considerability question, like the sentient stuff? Or do we say, here's how to redesign food systems and don't worry about that theory stuff? Does that make sense? I don't know where I'd want to start with the
Here's how to redesign food systems. Because they're more efficient, because they'll be more cost effective, because they'll be more profitable, why?
So it seems like you need the theoretical stuff
I
first.
think you do, I think they.
So then this is a good question for folks like you, Jackie, like,
Yes.
how do you do that in the classroom, given all the other things?
Correct.
Yeah.
We're hopefully
I
gonna
mean-
chat today about that.
Yeah, good.
Generally, engineering, is taught for efficiency. And,
Yeah.
right, and because it works. Design it this way because it will work better this way. And we change our designs because we figure out we have different materials, we have different capacities, right? The algorithm suggests a different way, and we improve the efficiency and effectiveness. That's the language of engineering.
Yeah, no matter, even though underlying, there's this whole paramount the health, safety, and welfare of the public, or in Jackie's arena, consider environmental constraints on your engineering, there are these underlying values, but it's
Right.
still the efficacy.
It always is, still. Still, even though it gets thrown back at it. So, for example, like Google's being sued now. Why are they being sued? Because the manipulations on children's attention spans, Facebook, et cetera.
Yeah, the technology was put into society without us really knowing what was gonna
We
happen.
always do that.
Yeah, no, it's bad.
And then we change when we see the results and we get reactions and we get pushback, and then policymakers have to make decisions to change, and then we redesign.
Mhm.
But generally, we don't start out that way, except the safety and the welfare of the human being in general is there, but fundamentally it's about effectiveness and efficiency.
So can I ask a follow-up question? We've asked the question, how do we change engineering education to account for animal ethics? And I'm wondering if it's fundamentally any different from the change that engineering education went through to address safety issues. So engineering initially was, I would argue, more about the efficiency and whatnot, but then we started to bring in the value of safety, and that has a cost. So it was one of the other constraints that engineers would have to think about. And some of it was self-serving, because if the bridge collapses and people die, you might get sued. But some of it is more than that, right? About being known as an engineering firm that thinks about the community and the people they serve and is reliable and those sorts of things. So we teach safety in engineering, even though we know that it introduces more cost, more time in the engineering process. We've kind of done that value calculus. Is there anything fundamentally different about bringing animal ethics into the engineering educational system? Are there lessons learned from how safety was brought into engineering education, or is it principally different?
Well, it's not about us.
Okay.
Because we still don't see ourselves as animals that are connected to the whole. We're changing engineering education around the environment now too, right? And companies are changing their mottos, right? And their focuses, because it's excelled well, right? And also the values are shifting. But my argument is that until we're willing to embrace other than human animals as equal to, valuable, significant, important beyond our own interests, it won't shift. Why would we? Why would we go to the effort and the time and the cost? How we would have to re-engineer so much. We'd have to give up so much. Horse racing is fun for people. Makes people a lot of money. Some of the horses enjoy it for a little while. Why would we change that? Why would we teach different kinds of design that aren't anthropocentric, that aren't about enlightened self-interest? It's our nature. I don't know why we would. Am I wrong? Tell me that I'm wrong. No.
Just had a question about that. Do you think it's more important to start with like trying to change people's values, or like meeting them kind of where they are? Because if I tell you that it's going to save you money and that'll be the reason why you save animals, is it worth me trying to, say, well, it's good for them, or talk about sentience instead of like meeting them where their values are already at?
Okay. You don't always have to start with people. And who's say I'm right? I'm just being preaching. I might be wrong. So it's a competition. My values are yours. If I want to move yours, I have to start where you are. And I have to educate you differently so that you see things in a way that align with what you value. I don't think we can change those values, but we can help them to see things that align with their values. but it's absolutely a competition of values. I literally may not be correct, but I believe in what I'm saying. Now, practically speaking, it might bottom line come down to the ecology of the whole thing and our survival. I think when the last right whale is gone, it'll be like the other species that are going to sink or go, oops, we're back in. But at some point, it's going to tip us into a place that our survival is. Don't you think so, as a biologist?
I think so.
Okay, thank you.
One of my mentors distinguished between judo versus sumo approaches, and I always loved that distinction. Starting, rather than trying to force your view on somebody else, use their energy to move. That's the judo approach. It's just very wrong. It's not really what that's.
Yeah. And that's what I do with my students. It's like, let's talk about what you care about. Like, where are you? What do you believe? What's important to you? Articulate that. Get clear about that. Where's that coming from? Understand it and be conscious.
Let's do one or two more questions. We'll do these two
We've got
questions.
two, we've got two.
Yeah, two's good. Yeah.
Think about this thing about like when you're trying to like when you push to about like systems, could it be useful to like go back to like what is the function of those values and those like ethics and moralities? Because I believe, and maybe I'm wrong because it's on the area, but like one of the functions, like main reasons we have like ethics and morality is for our own innovation.
Of course.
If all our values have the same function, why are they different, and how can, like going back to the function of self-preservation, like trying to develop those values. Like for example, I think that like having animal ethics is very important, is not only because I care about animals, but because I think in the long term it'd be beneficial to our self-preservation.
Yeah.
So like would that be useful to like not impose one's values to others, but like to bring them closer together and ask how to like how they are team together?
Is that a rhetorical question?
I don't know.
I could see both sides of that, right? For me, this is where my students, my undergrad ethics students, was introduced to like the Immanuel Kant's view.
Yeah.
Because Kant has this position he takes that says you don't treat other people merely as means, but as ends in themselves. My students are always like, okay, never treat anybody as means. And
Merely is
both of those things are the case. We treat one another as means stands all the time.
All the
We
time.
treat animals as means stands, but to see animals and each other as more than that, I think is the goal. That's the Kantian goal, but it's also the like everyday human goal. So I think both things you're describing are the case, right? We have ethics to protect ourselves, but our ethics extend beyond ourselves at the same time.
So we're all trying to survive, but we can't survive as individuals. We can't. We're collective, we're a whole. We know that about the human species. We know that we need each other. I think we're becoming more aware that we may need other species as well. And that may shift values. We grow in our learning and understanding and appreciation of that collectively. I was walking down a beach on the Martha's Vineyard a couple weeks ago, and something came to the surface, and I thought, weird time of the year for somebody to be out, skimmed to us, snorkeling. And it came again. As I was walking down the beach, it kept coming up as I was walking down the beach. I finally realized it was a sea turtle. And I felt like it was playing. It's like, then I thought, well, no, that's not all about me. It's just having fun, but it kept going along. But and they come up and they look around it. And there was something, there was a feeling of reassurance, comfort, just because it was there. To some extent, I think that we are possibly moving more and more into an awareness of the comfort of the home. I believe that's happening. I think that's what I'm seeing in the literature.
Okay, so my question is kind of like, to what extent is starting this like educational ethics a little late at the undergrad level? Well, because really you don't want to think about just engineering, but like generally just being more conscious and aware of like, like how food ends up in the grocery store, like just how these decisions can be made if you don't make it yourself, right? So, like, is it a little late to be thinking just like the higher ed level?
Yes, absolutely. I have engineering students who didn't realize that potatoes were root vegetables. It's like, how do you not know? I want you to know these things. I want you to know what your food is that actually comes out of the soil. So, absolutely, but that's what's tricky, and this is your work, right? The who's determining the pedagogy and the curriculum, the content of the curriculum. Right now, it's tricky. But absolutely, and that's where you want to hope that parents are conscientiously aware and they're working with their young ones and on and on and on, but absolutely. By the way, for your sake, because of your studies, there's an organization called Animal Computer ACI, Animal Computer Interaction. And they're doing really interesting work on creating computer systems that interact with animals for all kinds of reasons, some of which are about communication. ACI, very interesting group. Okay.
That's great. Thank you so much for doing it.
It's just really interesting.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Berne.
My pleasure.
It was really a deep exploration of the topic, but I think that was made possible through your presentation. Dr. Jonathan Beaver's wonderful Q&A and moderation. He does a fantastic job, but also questions from folks here and also joining us remotely. I really appreciate it. So there's another hand for all of this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
We'll keep thinking about this topic. I just want to give a shout out to our next event, which I think is on January 23rd, next year. Dr. Heather Douglas, who is at Michigan State University, is going to join us. And she's an expert in ethics of scientific research. And she's going to give a presentation and entertain questions on the title of Legitimate and Illegitimate Limits to Scientific Freedom. So how far does scientific freedom go? What are the ethical issues there? So I hope you'll join. I'll certainly send out copious emails to everyone, and I hope you'll participate. But if you have questions or suggestions for our speaker series, any here or remote, please send an email to me, and we'll take those into consideration, see what we can do to make ethically speaking even better for everyone else. So thank you, and thank you to remote folks who joined.